Hey everybody. So, when I was first getting my channel started, I obviously hoped that it would one day become bigger and make me some money. I never fully planned on that happening. I was extremely doubtful that it would, but it was something to hope for, to aspire to. The reason I'm telling you this right now is that around 2 years ago, when I was first getting my Patreon started, I, on a lark, made it a goal that if I ever got $1,000 pledged a month, I would do an hour-long video about the 2006 Adam Sandler film Click, my least favorite movie ever made. We all make promises when we're young, don't we? Imagine the young lovers, folded in each other's arms, sharing sweet nothings. I'll love you forever, they say. I'll be there for you, always, no matter what. But they don't keep that promise, do they? They don't have to keep that promise. So what's up with Click? That's the question on the table, right? What's Click's deal? What's Click all about? Well, Click is a loose adaptation of the classic French story, The Magic Thread. It's about a little impatient boy who encounters a witch who offers him a ball of thread he can use to fast forward his life. At first, he uses the thread when he's bored at school and wants to skip through the day. But quickly, he wants more. He wants to grow up and get engaged to the girl he loves. So he pulls harder on the thread and skips to that point in his life. But then, he's conscripted into the army, so he's gotta skip that, and I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. There's always something in his life that he wants to pass by, something he wants to get to faster. And by the end of his life, after skipping so much, he realizes that he hasn't really lived at all. And then, he dies, and at his funeral everybody spits on his grave and laughs at him for being such a loser. No, I'm just playing with you there. He actually gets to go back to being a kid, having learned his lesson. And that's Click in a nutshell, right?
Tonight, let's live it up. I got my money, let's spend it up. Go out and smash it like, oh my god. Jump off that sofa, let's kick it.
Adam Sandler gets a magical universal remote from Christopher Walken, fast forwards through his life, feels bad about missing so much, etc., etc. And considering this, you might think that Click is just a simple morality tale, a way of reminding us to live in the present and to not take our lives for granted. But things get way more strange than that. And under the surface of Click is a film that's far more intricate and surprising and messy than you might expect. Over the last month, I've spent a ridiculous amount of time thinking about Click, this movie that I hate and that I find fascinating. And today, we're gonna explore it. Just really get in there and tear it apart. And I hope you enjoy that. I don't really know what the point of this is. For me, the point is that I will no longer have to make an hour-long video about Click. That's my point here. I don't know why you're here. That's something you have to figure out with you and whatever God you pray to. Jesus. Part 1. Comedy. So, I'm going to be discussing Click in a lot of different ways and with a lot of different lenses over the course of this video. But I think it makes sense to start here with the aspect of Click that is probably most obvious. That it's an Adam Sandler comedy, jam-packed with funny jokes. And I can't imagine a better place to start than to just say, Click is one of the least fun comedies I've ever seen in my life. And by that, I don't just mean Click isn't funny. Because no, Click isn't very funny, but it does make me laugh sometimes. I like this dog pooping joke, for instance. I like the joke where Adam Sandler's secretary is always asking him if they can pee, and he's like, "Why are you asking me that? Go pee!"
Go to the bathroom. I told you, you don't have to ask me.
You know, that puts a smile on my face. Terry Crews's cameo is pee funny. And just in general, I know that some of the people watching this must have watched Click and thought it was dom-fongy. And I don't really want to try to convince you to think differently about that. Rather, when I say that Click is one of the least fun comedies I've ever seen, what I mean isn't just that most of its jokes aren't funny to me, but also that they make me want to die. They make me forget what it is to feel joy. So often in the film, the setup to a joke is, check out how much of a rod the protagonist is, and the punchline is just, Michael is a creepy, misanthropic misogynist, and in multiple scenes in the movie, he just terrorizes people in a way that feels like it wants to be funny. Michael gets mad and starts running after some kids for making loud noises, and he says this joke line about how he used to beat people up.
Now you better run! I kicked your father's ass in high school and now I'm gonna kick yours!
He goes to Bed Bath & Beyond and the employee acts like a dork, so Michael motions to punch him in the face.
Whoa!
At one point, Michael's wife's best friend talks about how she wants to be in a relationship, and he sees this as a great time to belligerently shame her for cucking her men.
They went to work. You had sex with their unemployed brothers. You're a horn dog.
Michael! Okay, sweetie.
The joke is that he can mute her when she starts crying.
Here's the pitch to Matsui, a deep drive.
So I could go on with this list, but for now, I just want to say the obvious. This movie is filled with jokes where Michael just gets the opportunity to be needlessly awful to people. Take that, you lady who's just talking about her life. It's time you got a real talking to from me, Michael. It's gross and weird, and to me at least, just painfully unfunny. But I know what you're thinking right now. Big Joel, there's a glaring hole in your analysis here, and it all comes down to one point. You're only picking jokes that happen in the first 40 minutes of the movie. What kind of nonsense is that? Click is a film with a protagonist who has to learn and change. So of course, we're not supposed to like him in the first act. We're not supposed to be on his side with these jokes. That way, by the end of the movie, we can see how much his character has grown. How can you not understand that? You media novice. I should do what you do, and you should wash my balls. And to this, I say, okay, let's explore that idea. Part 2, A Christmas Carol. The story of A Christmas Carol is a simple one. Ebenezer Scrooge is a greedy old miser, but then some ghosts enter the picture, and they show him some visions of his past, present, and future that convince him to change. It's not hard to see how Click essentially wants to be a modern adaptation of A Christmas Carol. I mean, the remote gives Michael visions of his past as well as his future, and it's given to him by Morty, the Angel of Death, a sort of ghost.
I'm the angel of death.
What's more, the film makes an interesting choice that enables it to be even more Christmas Carol-y. That during the time Michael fast-forwards, he changes, becomes a dumbed-down simulacra of himself.
See, that's you, on autopilot. The lights are on, but nobody's home. The remote lets your mind skip around, but your body actually stays put for all the boring stuff.
Honey, we should go to lunch tomorrow to get your dad's birthday gift.
Sounds good.
He doesn't talk much, he doesn't react to things around him. When he has sex, he's weird and fast about it. So much so that it's odd that his wife seemingly continues to have sex with this robot man. This is kind of an unexpected element, right? We could easily imagine a version of Click where, when Michael fast forwards, he just goes later in time, and in the interim acts the way he'd normally act. That's what happens in the magic thread, after all. But what this choice does is center the film around a set of bad personality traits and behaviors. Because Michael becomes a different person when he fast forwards, his fast forwarding doesn't just have consequences for him and what he gets to experience, but also for his world, for the way he treats and mistreats the people in his life. In a very Christmas Carol-like way, Michael gets to see the dismal future that might happen if he doesn't change his act. So, we had a theory, right? That the reason why Michael sucks so much in the first act and has all these awful jokes surrounding him is that he has to change. And now we have the mechanism through which he can do just that. See how awful he's been and start to act differently. But as it turns out, that idea just doesn't really work. And if you want to know why it doesn't, I have two answers. A short one that actually proves the point, and an unnecessarily long one that proves the point, but worse. Let's start with the short one. The reason why I know that Michael doesn't stop being an asshole over the course of Click is that this simply does not happen. Click isn't exactly a subtle film, and if we were supposed to think that Michael was no longer a weird dork by the end, you'd think there would be some acknowledgement of that. But we don't get that at all. Probably the most obvious example of the film not being invested in seeing Michael grow occurs with a running joke, where Michael harms a child. In the first half of the movie, there are two iterations of this joke that are basically identical. The kid is bratty, and so Michael causes some psychological or physical damage to him.
Not anymore, it ain't.
And it feels like that's setting up for a big, notable change in his character. Maybe after he's fast-forwarded a lot and seen a vision of his grim future, he no longer feels the need to torment this literal baby man. But nope. There is a third iteration of this joke, and it's the exact same thing again.
No, Kathy, this isn't mine. I took it out of Kevin's hands. Yeah, he was smoking like a chimney.
No, I wasn't!
I think I smell marijuana in it.
Kevin O'Doyle, you get your ass in this house right now! I hate you!
And while this scene is still in the first hour of the film, what's important is that rather than taking this obvious opportunity to demonstrate character development in a way that would feel intuitive, the film is just like, screw that. And just in general, we get the same basic Michael throughout the whole thing. Even 3/4 in, he's still kicking his ex-wife's husband in the balls and running around just judging people.
Aunt Peggy, is that you? God, you got old.
So, yeah, Click just isn't really invested in making Michael less of a dick. Anyway, that's the short answer, and to give you the longer one, we have to return to the comedy of the film and see how it works on a fundamental level. So let's go back to a joke scene I already mentioned, the one where Michael berates his wife's best friend.
You're a horn dog.
Michael, okay.
Looking at this scene in isolation, it would be hard to understand what it says or how it works. Even though it feels like a funny, silly moment, it's hard to say exactly what the point is. I mean, all it is a dude looking for any reason at all to humiliate someone. It's more tragic than anything else. But if we look at the movie more holistically, we can start to put the pieces together, understand what comic moments are going into this moment, and therefore what makes it funny. So here's one idea that the film spends some time establishing for us, that it's funny to think of undesirable women in a sexual way. We can see this in two salient jokes in the film. First, when Michael is looking at his past, bragging that he got with tons of attractive people before he found his wife, he sees that actually, he dated some pretty ugly ladies.
Is that a man or a woman?
A woman.
What is this, Animal Planet?
Second, as Michael is arriving at his job, he walks past a number of attractive assistants before getting to his desk, where an ugly woman works. And while I do feel uncomfortable writing a video where I just call a real human woman ugly, we have to see that in both of these cases, that's the joke, and the joke is obvious. We expect to see an attractive woman, but instead, we see an unattractive one. And in that incongruity, we have very basic comedy. But okay, here's another idea that the film is working towards. That the sexual purity of the women in the movie is something that we are naturally concerned with as an audience. This doesn't come up all that much. I mean, it would be weird if it did, but we can see it coming through in the way that Michael treats his daughter. At the beginning of the movie, Michael makes a little joke about how his daughter shouldn't know about sex until she's like 35.
Hey, look at Sundance wrestle his duck.
Oh, no, that's not wrestling. That's something you should know about for another 10 to 30 years. 10 for you, 30 for you.
This is a very 1950s sitcom joke, the sort of thing the audience can easily understand as relatable or even nostalgic. And we're certainly not meant to see this moment and judge Michael for being weird about his daughter's sexuality, particularly because the joke is echoed at the very end of the film.
One day you are gonna be the hottest chick alive, but you still gotta have brains, so tomorrow I'm gonna teach you calculus.
You know calculus?
I knew you'd call me on that. All right, your mother will teach you. Now get your rest.
As an aside, this is a weird and telling scene, I think, because it doesn't make a lot of sense within the plot of the movie. I mean, Michael has seen his daughter grow up and become a pretty lady, and all the while, he said things about how she should put her boobs away and stop looking all hot and sexy like she does.
When did you get boobs?
The same time you did, Dad.
Hey, what are you doing? Put a sweater on, cover them up.
Blondie, big lips, chesty. What? Is that your girl? No, that's your daughter, Samantha.
He just thinks she's super hot. That's just a thing in the movie. That's like 10 minutes of the movie. But he never learns anything about how intelligent she is, about what she has and hasn't learned. We don't really know anything about her, except that she's nice, I guess. And so, watching Michael remind his daughter that she still has to be smart even though she's hot, we have to ask, why does he feel she's not smart in the first place? Why is he saying this? Well, the answer is that her hotness inherently poses a problem, whether we know about it or not. And for that reason, Michael has to teach her calculus.
Tomorrow I'm gonna teach you calculus.
You know calculus?
I knew you'd call me on that. All right, your mother will teach you. Now get your rest, because tomorrow we're going.
One final idea that the film explores, that it's funny to put people in their place. This is a fundamental building block of comedy, one that can be seen in everything from pranks on The Office to Bugs Bunny, but it is everywhere in Click. Michael shaming his awful boss, hurting the guy who married his ex-wife, destroying this kid's stuff. The joke here is obvious. It's just fun to take people down a notch. To look at a self-serious or arrogant or powerful person, show that they're not so great or important, and then, maybe most importantly, get away with it. It's fun. And now that we have these three takes in mind, we can look at the scene where Michael yells at this lady and reconstruct how it's supposed to be funny. First, we have this woman talking, and notably, Michael does not want to sleep with her. She gestures in a somewhat sexual way, and we get this reaction shot where he looks genuinely disgusted. And since we already know from other jokes that when Michael doesn't want to have sex with someone, that's a relevant avenue for comedy, we can sense that something fongy is coming here. Then we hear an important fact, that this woman, she's promiscuous to a fault.
You've already cheated on 3 different husbands with their brothers. I think you've given enough juice to everybody.
And we've already learned that this is a natural thing for us to think about. After all, this is essentially the woman Michael doesn't want his daughter to turn into. So now, we have the perfect setup, right? This woman is presented as gross, and yet she has sex. And even better, she has sex immorally by cucking her hubbies. Now, we can get to our punchline, giving this lady what she deserves. Michael presents her with evidence of her moral failing. We get to see a rise out of her.
They went to work. You had sex with their unemployed brothers. You're a horn dog.
Michael. Okay, sweetie.
No!
And then, in the climax, he gets away with it with the help of his universal remote.
Don't look at me! What's looking at me?
Here's the pitch to Matsui. A deep
What seems like a strange, sad scene, one where Michael insults and harangues a woman for absolutely no reason, is given justification through the ideas that the rest of the film is expressing. We know how to feel about this scene partially because the film has already told us how to feel. So now that we've made sense of this random moment, we have to ask, why are we supposed to care about any of this? Is my point that Click is in fact not woke? Well, no. I've seen this movie 4 times now, and I promise you that I can't feel anything anymore, much less disdain for the politically incorrect raunch world that is Click.
How dare you compare Prince Habibu's Bikini Hut restaurant to this hoochie house?
Rather, the reason I care is that it helps us answer our question from before about how Michael does and doesn't change over the course of the movie. See, looking at Michael in the first act of Click, we might say, wow, this guy sure has a lot of growing up to do. He's an abusive weirdo who gets furiously angry at the drop of a hat. And maybe the movie could have been about him learning to not be that way. Maybe I'd even want to see that movie, but that's not this movie. And the reason I know that is that the film fundamentally sees things the way Michael does. It understands women the way he understands women, makes the jokes he makes, judges people the way he does. In essence, the reason why Michael acts the way he does in this scene is that the film fundamentally thinks that this lady had it coming, and why fix what isn't broken. But here's the thing. Now that I've shown you in 2 ways that Michael doesn't stop being a jerk over the course of Click, we have to ask a question. What is the purpose of this whole Christmas Carol thing? Like, there's this whole elaborate infrastructure in the movie that's devoted to showing Michael that he has to change. But if the film is almost completely unresponsive to the most obvious shitty things about him, then why are we even here? What does our Ebenezer Scrooge have to learn from his Christmas ghost? Part 3. It's a Wonderful Life. Well, as it turns out, the answer to this question isn't exactly hidden by the text, it's incredibly obvious. What Michael has to learn is that family is important, and that he should stop prioritizing his job over them. We can see this all over the place toward the end of the film. From Michael telling his son that he should put family first,
Family comes first.
to Christopher Walken telling Michael that he never put family first.
The remote goes by your behavior. Every time you had a conflict between work and home, work won.
But we can also see it in what is, without a doubt, the best and most fleshed out scene in Click. Toward the very end of the movie, Michael finds out that his father died during one of his fast forwards, and he goes to look at the last moment he spent with him.
Can you let me do my work?
I'm so sorry I barged in.
I love you, son. See you later, Grandpa. I love you. Dad. Bob. Bob.
So there we have it, right? In this over-the-top yet surprisingly emotional scene, we see very clearly that Michael's problem, the one that the film has been directing him to solve this entire time, is that he's not a good family man, and if he keeps that up, he will lose everything that matters. So, looking at this scene, it feels justified, right? Of course, this is a logical place for the film to get to. Of course, this should be its message. But in this section of the video, I want to interrogate that idea and suggest that although this lesson feels reasonable, the way the film approaches it is utterly confused and hollow and vapid and awful. And to explain why I say that, let's talk about It's a Wonderful Life.
Let's do it, let's do it, let's do it again. Let's do it, let's do it, do it again. Let's do it, let's do it, do it, do it. Let's do it, let's do it. I got a feeling.
It's a Wonderful Life is probably my favorite Christmas movie. It's a very famous and long film, but let me try to summarize it as briefly as I can. It's about a guy, George Bailey, who lives a pretty sad life in some ways. He wanted to see the world and go to college, but his father had a stroke and he had to take over the family bank. He wanted to go on a honeymoon, but the Great Depression came, and he had to use his own money to prevent a run on the bank. But still, George makes do with what he has. He lives a happy life, he runs a good business, genuinely trying to serve his community with good loans and affordable and quality housing. But even this comes under threat. It's a bit complicated, but the gist is that he's going bankrupt because of the actions of a miserly slumlord banker, Mr. Potter. And in this desperate situation, George realizes that if he died, he would get his life insurance money and be able to take care of the bank and his family. And so he considers killing himself, ultimately wishing he was never born in the first place. Now is when the more famous part of the movie kicks in. As George is standing on a bridge about to jump in the water, he's met by a guardian angel who shows him what the world would look like if he had never existed. And it's awful. George's brother dies in an accident that he wasn't there to save him from. His town is run by the unscrupulous Mr. Potter. His wife never gets married.
You never married. Where's Mary? Where is she? Where is she? She's just about to close up the library!
By seeing all this, George realizes that his life is valuable, and so he reverses it all, goes back to his life, and his community helps him get through his money problems. Cool. Okay, let's just point to the elephant in the room. Click is weirdly similar to It's a Wonderful Life. We can see this just by looking at the main mechanic of the film. At its core, what the remote control shows Michael is a vision of a world where he has absented himself, where he is replaced by an unfeeling robot. But more importantly, for our purposes, the circumstances leading Michael to wanting to fast forward, to essentially want to commit this existential suicide, are quite similar to what George faces. Like George, Michael also lives under the thumb of an unscrupulous miser. This greedy douche who pays him little, only cares about profit, and essentially doesn't let him take time off. And like George, Michael is brought to suicide by that boss. After Michael's boss promised him a promotion, he went out and bought his wife a bag she wanted and his kids some bikes. But then he finds out that the boss didn't intend to give him that promotion, at least not in the near future.
Whoa, cowboy. I said land the Watsuhita account, you'll get promoted. I didn't mean right this second.
But I already told my wife, sir. I spent money I don't have. To do these documents, it's gonna take me months.
And you better get started.
And so he has to return the things he bought. And listening to his wife explain to their kids that they can't afford this pretty modest gift drives Michael into despair. He fast forwards his life to when he finally does get the promotion, what turns out to be a year.
There was a mix-up at Daddy's work, and we just need to bring the bikes back for now.
But I already told Kevin O'Doyle I got new bike.
Well, we can paint my old bike and make it look new.
That's a girl's bike. All the kids make fun of me. No.
I can't take this anymore. Fast forward me to my promotion.
So here's the Michael Newman.
It all feels almost copy and pasted from the scene in It's a Wonderful Life where George stands on the bridge. So this choice here to paint Michael as a George-like character is an incredibly strange one. And it's strange because It's a Wonderful Life isn't about a guy who has to change his behavior. George isn't a guy who acts poorly, far from it. He's ridiculously self-sacrificing and kind-hearted. And when he does consider killing himself, that's not posed as an opportunity for us to judge him, but rather for us to sympathize with him. Here we have a guy who we know to be good and virtuous, and yet now he has been beaten down by the world around him, fallen prey to predatory business practices, been treated as though his life is so meaningless that he would literally be worth more dead than alive.
Miserable little clerk crawling in here on your hands and knees and begging for help. No securities, no stocks, no bonds, nothing but a miserable little $500 equity in a life insurance policy.
And what he has to realize isn't that he was acting wrong and has to change his act. Instead, he has to learn that he is good enough. Learn that no matter what Mr. Potter thinks, there is tremendous value in who George is and in what he does for his community and his family. His life isn't bad, it's actually wonderful. And this is how Click chooses to treat its protagonist. As far as Michael's relationship to his job and family go, he's not greedy and extravagant, not an Ebenezer Scrooge type who lives for himself at the expense of others. Rather, he is a man who has been lowered by circumstance, who wants to give himself and his family a modest amount of commercial comfort, but who is completely incapable of doing that, and who hates himself for it. And so, watching the final act in the film, watching Michael be told that he always chose work over family, watching the simulacra of himself not even look up and say goodbye to his dying father because he's too busy with his job, sure, that's emotional. It's the reason why I think so many people talk about crying when they see this movie. But how has the movie earned any of this? What, because he had to postpone a family vacation because his boss all but forced him to continue working?
Can't it just wait 3 days?
Michael, these guys are Japanese. They can't wait for their fish to cook.
Because he couldn't be emotionally present at one family dinner because he had too much work? Because he bought some relatively small gifts for his family? I just don't buy it. To say that he's choosing work over family just seems random to me. And now, just looking at all this, we've gotten ourselves into a pretty sticky situation, haven't we? On one hand, where we might feel Michael needs to change his outwardly terrible behavior and the way he treats other people, the movie is in his court, isn't invested in making him face those demons. But where we are sympathetic to Michael, where he's coded as a good man doing his best and taking any opportunity to show kindness, we are judgmental of him, told that he must become a better person or die alone. In other words, in the moments where Michael is Ebenezer Scrooge, we love him, and in the moments where he is George Bailey, we hate him. And just from a thematic perspective, this all feels extremely wrong. Feels like it's not supposed to be that way. Feels like it doesn't make any sense. But okay, let's try to make some sense of it. Part 4. Click. So far in this video, I've avoided talking about one of the most important ways that Michael's universal remote works. That, after a while, it just goes on autopilot. For instance, if Michael fast forwards through sex too many times, the remote will assume that's what he wants and fast forward through sex from that point forward. This is the central conflict of Click, because when Michael skips forward in the scene we just talked about, the remote essentially takes over and starts fast forwarding more and more of his life away.
I fast forwarded through sex one time. I don't want to skip it forever. I like sex. It feels good.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you fast forwarded through an entire year. That's a lot of sex. Put it all together, that's like 30 minutes worth for you.
No. So everything I fast forwarded is just gonna do it on its own now?
Pretty much.
On the face of it, this is an incredibly odd mechanic for the film to center itself around. One that doesn't really work with the lenses we've thus far applied to the movie. Looking at It's a Wonderful Life or A Christmas Carol, sure, the protagonists of those movies see things that upset them, but nobody is really forced to do much of anything. Ebenezer Scrooge has to see some ghosts over 3 nights so he can learn a lesson. But once those nights are done, that's it.
Heaven in the Christmas time be praised for this day. I say it on my knees, Jacob and Robert, on my knees.
It's not vindictive at all. And George Bailey, well, he sees a world where he was never born, but that's very obviously a nice thing for him. And literally the minute he wants to go back to his normal life, boom, he's got it.
Please! I want to live again! I want to live again!
And we know that Click is modeling itself after these movies, and yet what happens in the film amounts to psychological torture, the protagonist being dragged through his life against his will. So we have to ask, why? What is the movie trying to accomplish here? And to answer that question, let's talk about Click. Not the movie, you absolute fucking idiots. No, the Goosebumps story of the same name, written by R.L. Stine.
You will beware. You're in for a scare.
It's about a kid, we'll call him Little TV Timmy, who gets a universal remote he can use to pause people and mute them and stuff. But then the remote starts malfunctioning and people stay frozen, and finally he clicks the power off button and presumably dies, because Goosebumps is hardcore. The similarities between this story and the movie Click didn't go unnoticed at the time. According to IMDb, Scholastic, the publisher of Goosebumps, was considering suing Adam Sandler and co. for plagiarism until they all agreed it was, quote, just a coincidence. And I don't know about that. You know, I don't know if it was just a coincidence. Seems pretty, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it was just a coincidence to me, but who am I? You know, I don't know. Maybe, who knows? Could be a coincidence that they made a movie of the same name with the same basic plot as a Goosebumps story. Could just be a coincidence. I don't know. Seems like more than a coincidence to me, but I don't know. That's my opinion. That's my thought. I don't know, though. You know, I don't want to get in any legal trouble here, but it seems like this has gone on way too long. Now, to be clear, I don't actually know if it was a coincidence, and even if it wasn't, I don't think it should be a suable offense to be inspired by somebody else's art. But nevertheless, we can see in this Goosebumps story another gesture of the film Click. The desire to be horrific, to rob its protagonist of agency for the sheer malicious pleasure of doing so. And as it turns out, this gesture defines Click, completely reframes how the film works on a thematic level. So let's talk about that. First off, the way the remote automatically propels Michael through his life feels entirely arbitrary. There are 2 major involuntary time skips in the film. The first occurs when Michael's boss tells him that he could be the CEO of his company one day. Michael unthinkingly says he'd be interested in that, and because he skipped forward once to get his promotion, the remote fast forwards him to when he's the boss, around 10 years.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if one day you ended up being our CEO.
Well, hey, I would love for that to happen, but...
No! No, no, no! I don't want a promotion! No!
The second is caused because at one point, Michael chooses to fast forward through a cold he has. Because of this, when he gets cancer for a long time later in his life, the remote decides to fast forward through all of it. That's another 6 years.
Since the head injury, you haven't been healthy a full day.
When exactly did I hurt my head?
What was it, like 6 years ago?
6 more years, no!
Both of these instances feel random, contrived, completely disconnected from who Michael is. He gets cancer, he accidentally says some words, so what? This doesn't say anything about our protagonist, about his behavior, about how he prioritizes work over family. Instead, it's just a meaningless gotcha. You wanted to skip over some stuff? Well, now you're gonna have to skip over everything. Pew pew! Ha ha! Woo! But the remote isn't just arbitrary, it's also completely unresponsive to anything Michael does. And so you can see what I mean by that, let's look at one interesting scene. Toward the middle of the film, after Michael has skipped forward a few years against his will, Christopher Walken, Morty, tells him this.
You can't change what already happened, but you're still a young man. Young fat man. You could win down a back.
So that's what I'll do.
Watching this moment, we're led to believe that this is gonna go somewhere. Maybe Michael could get his act together, live for his family more, stop fast forwarding. Maybe that could be the source of the film's conflict. Michael growing and learning to be a better person. But nope, none of that can happen because a few moments later, Michael is fast forwarded 10 years because he gets sick. Something he never could have predicted. So as it turns out, Morty was just lying there. The remote doesn't care what Michael does, and at this point, there's nothing he can do, no improvement he can make that will change anything. It's all irrelevant, at least until he dies in awful death. And looking at all of this, I can't help but feel like the movie is taunting us somehow. Like, I spent around 30 minutes talking about how incoherent the theming of this movie is. How it pretends like it's about prioritizing your family, but it doesn't earn that message. How it takes a dislikable, awful protagonist, but doesn't address any of the problems he has. But, you know, maybe that's exactly what the movie is doing. Pretending. Giving us the facade of a feel-good, sentimental comedy just so that it can turn around and say, you really thought we cared about that stuff? No, it pretends like it cares. Pretends it wants Michael to be a better guy, and that the plot is invested in seeing that happen. But just like Morty in this scene, the film is lying to us. Because the only thing it's really invested in is taking our protagonist, presenting him with this awful, arbitrary, painful world, and watching him suffer in it.
You know what? I can't give you a kiss because if I give you a kiss, it might lead to something else, and then zip, another 3 minutes goes by. You're laying there disappointed, and I'm laying there like an idiot smiling. So I want to be with you every minute of my life, and that's why I gotta leave right now.
Part 5. Conclusion. I hate Click a lot. And that's not some kind of over-the-top, affected, nostalgia critic opinion I have. I first saw the movie when I was 12, and basically from that point forward, if somebody asked me what my least favorite movie was, I'd say Click. There's really nothing I enjoy about it. I don't think it's funny most of the time, and I find many of its jokes distasteful and gross, but not in a good way. I don't like its insipid emotional scenes. They make me want to puke with how manipulative and grating they are.
Family comes first.
I don't like the horror elements. They just don't work for me or feel fleshed out. But having seen Click so many times and being forced to write this big long video about it, the thing that stuck with me most about it is the feeling that I can so easily imagine a version of this movie that makes sense, that works on a conceptual level, that isn't so awful. I mean, if you want to express that Michael is wealth obsessed, you shouldn't have him buy his kids some bikes and his wife a little bag when he thinks he comes into some money. That's too small, too reasonable. Instead, make him buy a big TV or a sports car. Something that says, this guy cares about conspicuous consumption, wants other people to see that he's made it. If you want to express character development, don't have Michael bully this child a third time with the same joke. Instead, have him treat the kid badly twice, and then the third time, maybe have him be nice. Do something that shows he's growing and changing. If you want the Click remote to express that Michael chooses his work over his family, or that he doesn't live in the present enough, don't just force him to go forward for arbitrary reasons. Instead, tie the way the remote fast forwards to how Michael acts. Make it responsive to who he is. And if you want to go down the surreal horror route, don't end the film with an overstated, syrupy message. It doesn't serve anything. But now that I've said all of this, I can't help but feel like this is the magic of Click. Like, do I think the movie would have been better if it had done any of the things I just described? If it had chosen a thematic and tonal through line and committed to it? Well, sure, but it's not like it would have been great, right? Best case scenario, I think Click could have been an adequate Adam Sandler vehicle. That's it. And say what you want about Click, but it's not that movie, not even close. Because every chance it gets, Click resists understanding or explanation. It wants to be the magic thread, and A Christmas Carol, and It's a Wonderful Life, and an Adam Sandler movie, and a horror film. And it combines all of these elements in such a haphazard way that the final result is as prohibitively dense as it is vacant and purposeless. To me, Click isn't just a bad movie, it's the bad movie. Worse, so much worse than the sum of its mediocre parts. And I hate it, but I'm not gonna forget about it. Mwah! Mwah! Video done! Hey everybody, so I know what you're thinking. You know, you said woo-woo video done, but the video's not done. That was only 44 minutes of gorgeous Click content when we signed on for a full hour. And here's the truth. I don't have an hour of scripted Click content in me. Not emotionally, not physically, not sexually. So here's what we're gonna do. Right now, I'm just gonna do 15 minutes of off the dome, purely unscripted, raw Click content for you. And that's how we're gonna get this baby up to an hour. If you wanna leave a downvote on this video, that's within your right, baby, because I don't know what to do. I worked so hard on those 44 minutes, and I really thought they would be an hour. And now it's not even close to an hour of Click content. We're not even close. So we have to figure something out because the video is due tomorrow. But before we get into the 15 minutes of off the dome content, I just wanted to say thank you so much to the patrons who made this video possible or whatever. It's super appreciated. All of you, to be able to make a living from this is incredible. And if you wanted to give even more money to me, it's always appreciated. And I'm pretty close to my second Patreon goal, which means I'll have to do a 24+ hour charity live stream, which should be fun. So keep that in mind. And with that, let's get into the off the dome takes, baby! All right. Okay. Okay. Click take number 1. What would Marx think about Click, right? You know, what would his take be? That seems like the sort of question that it would make sense for a video essayist to ask. I don't know. What do you guys think? I don't know. There's a few things about the movie that I think Marx would be interested in. The first of which is that for some reason, when Adam Sandler fast forwards through work, he continues to do like an amazing job to the point that his boss is like, every account you touch turned into gold.
Every account you worked on turned into gold.
That's kind of weird, right? Like, Adam Sandler skips through his family life all the time, and the result is that they hate him, but he skips through his job for years, and the result is that he becomes the CEO. It seems like some sort of a fun, satirical take on capitalism, where the point is that what commercial industry demands is a drone who just achieves what he achieves and doesn't think and just complies with the bourgeois Ubermensch. All right, well, that was that take. That was the Marx take. Moving. There's a pretty funny interview where Adam Sandler synopsizes Click that I think we should watch right now. How about that? I'm gonna watch it while you watch it.
My children want to be with me. My wife wants to be with me. There's not enough of me to go around. Even though deep down inside I am a great man. What happens is this man, Morty, that Christopher Walken plays, he offers me this device. He says it's a really one of the best universal remote controls you can get, and I get excited about this thing, and I'm the only guy to have this thing, so he gives it to me, and I find out that it's not just for my television. It actually works on my life, and it works. If I want, I can fast forward an argument with my wife. I can actually hit mute and not hear her friend yap at me. I can blast through a cold. I can change my boss's speech to Spanish.
There's something so funny to me about Adam Sandler just apathetically listing off functions that the click remote can do. Like, imagine being him in that moment. Imagine fully hating yourself and wishing you were dead and being asked to talk to this fucking interviewer about what the movie Click is about, and just sitting there and saying like, oh yeah, Click is about a guy who finds the click remote. The click remote can pause. The click remote can mute. That's a pretty good interview, I think. That's a telling, that can tell you something. Okay, moving on. I'm moving on myself to the next take I'm gonna talk about. Click hates fat people like so much. Like, it's not something I talked about in the video because I had a hard time like bringing it up. But the movie is like violently angry, it feels like, at the concept of fatness. The obvious thing is that when Michael fast forwards 10 years or whatever, he becomes a big fat guy, and his son becomes a big fat guy too, played by Jonah Hill. But the thing that really stuck out to me when I was a kid is that after Adam Sandler is all big and fat, and his son is all big and fat too, the scene after that, they both get thin again. Like, the movie hates fat people so much that it can't even use them as like, it can't even use them as a punishment. It has to reverse that punishment immediately. Adam Sandler in the movie can get old and die and be forgotten and alienated, but the one thing he can't be and his son can't be for more than 5 minutes is fat. Like, isn't that disgusting? I don't think I can keep recording more. I don't think I can keep recording more video. I think I'm gonna have to bite the bullet and accept that whatever approximation of an hour we have, that's what it's gonna be, and that has to be okay. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I didn't disappoint you. I feel like I ruined the first 44 minutes of the video.
You have to make more video.
No, I don't. I don't want to do it.
You have to make more video or the children watching will die.
I'm cutting it now. I think I'm done. Come meet my girlfriend. This is us. We're in Italy right now, heart of the coronavirus. Are you feeling a little bit corona-beat?
Well, a little bit, but luckily with my click remote I can just fast forward right through that.
Luckily with my click remote I can fast forward through meeting your mother. Luckily with my click remote. Bye. This was a magical time that we shared with you and me and Click and Jesus up there. And I would like to thank you so much for the times that we had. There's good times in a person's life, like meeting their best friend. And there are bad times in a person's life, like meeting your bitter end. But in the meantime, I am happy I could have your attention today so that we could talk about Click and talk about Adam Sandler. Yo, what's the plot of Click? I want to know. Well, sit right down, I'll tell you so. There's a guy named Michael, he has a Click remote. And he can use that Click remote to fast forward time. And he can use that Click remote to mute his wife. And he can use that Click remote to change his boss's speech to Spanish. And he can use that Click remote to see his childhood. If I had a Click remote, I don't know what I'd do. But I think the number one thing I'd do is thank you for being my patrons, being my audience, being my friends, and I know that I have so much to give. But let's talk about Click some more. It's a movie starring Adam Sandler. And by his sides, Christopher Walken, and his wife's played by someone I don't know, but there's so much he has to say. And he thinks his daughter's super sexy. He looks at a picture, he says, wow, she's hot. Then his son's like, well, that's your daughter, don't mean much. But he thinks that's pretty weird. And so he goes back in time and tells that daughter to stop dressing provocatively. Because Click has the answers. Click has the keys. Click has the words that we should be living by, oh yeah. And I wanted to say one more thing about Click. Do you remember the scene where Michael fast forwards, and he fast forwards his dog so that his poop don't take all day long? Do you remember? And do you remember how it felt to see Michael fast forwarding that dog? You probably laughed and you thought it was so funny. Well, I thought making this video was the best thing I could do. I mean, we all have so much to worry about, and maybe you're feeling blue. So I picked up my remote and made a special video. And now, you know, don't worry so much about coronavirus. Don't worry so much about Donald Trump. Don't worry so much about Bernie Sanders. It's all gonna work itself out. And I hope that I gave you a moment to share where the people in our lives could be. Oh, whoa. And the things that we said and the things that we did don't matter in the grand scheme. It's as though God has a Click remote. It's as though God himself is fast forward in time, and I can feel my life fast forwarding. I'm losing my shit. 30 seconds, I have to do more. There's a scene in Click where Michael fast forwards through his sex. And then later on, he wants to stop fast forwarding through his sex. And so he turns to his main man, Christopher Walken. He tells him that he wants to have sex again, please, because it feels good. And I think there's something in there to learn.